Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. I'm not much of a golfer. I played more, I think, in the past. I guess it maybe goes in spurts on occasion. I just don't find I have time for it. Maybe it's more accurate to say I don't make time for it. But I have had my share of lessons over the years, and when I do golf, I'm usually kind of, respectable enough to have fun most of the time. With a little practice, usually my swing comes back. I remember little adjustments I need to make, and there are lots of things to remember. You can easily end up thinking too much when you're trying to work on your swing, get in your head a little too much, but one of the basic rules of swinging a club that's true in a lot of different sports that involve a swing of some kind is that you need to follow through. I still remember in high school I participated in a summer golf program with some friends, and at the end of the season we had a shotgun tournament, best ball, and our foursome tied for first place, so there was a playoff, and the playoff involved pitching the ball from the rough onto the green, closest shot won. And if you know about, pitching in golf, it's a shorter swing, everything is more compact, and you don't necessarily follow through in the same way, but you usually keep your torso moving through your swing, and your club usually follows through a bit as you do that. And some of my teammates had already taken their shot, and it was my turn. So I took a couple of practice swings, I was feeling good, only about 100 people watching, and we were up on a small berm, and I didn't want to put too much power on it. So I swung, and of course, I didn't move my body through as I was supposed to, and the ball didn't go where I wanted it to. I have no remembrance of exactly how we finished and if one of my teammates saved us or not. I only remember that one shot that I missed. In today's reading, James is hung up a bit on something similar. He's apparently been observing fellow Christians and noticing some follow-through issues. It has to do with favoritism and how individuals and congregations as a whole are responding to those of lesser means. He says, if a person with gold rings and fine clothes comes in and you say, have a seat here, please, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in and you say, stand there, or sit at my feet, have you not made distinctions among yourselves? So we don't know every detail about what James has been hearing or seeing, but he paints a pretty clear picture of the outcome. For whatever reason, people with financial means are getting more attention and honor than others. And by naming this, James is pretty clear about how it's supposed to work. People are supposed to be treated equally. Just because they have more doesn't mean they deserve a better place in the community. James lifts up that timeless moral code and spiritual teaching of Jesus, love your neighbor as yourself. James calls it the royal law. It reigns over everything else. James alludes to some interesting historical context. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? Is it not they who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? And again, we don't have all of that context now for what James was experiencing and referencing, but New Testament scholar Craig Kester says that in that world, wealth and influence typically went together, and those who had wealth expected to be welcomed and to receive certain privileges. It was widely understood that lower class people didn't deserve the same respect? This is a question really about social class, and traditionally class has had less of a role in the United States than places like England. One of the first times I thought about that more carefully was in talking with one of my college professors, Patty Dale, who moved to Minnesota from England. And he grew up in a working class area, and the way you spoke and where you were from had a huge impact on how people treated you. He found it incredibly liberating to live in the United States. Still, I wonder if there are ways in which social class still impacts us in the United States. And, are there ways that we subtly distinguish? Class sometimes gets woven together with things like language or accents. It intersects with race, where you live, where you went to school, what you can afford. Are there subtle and not so subtle ways we view people differently because of these things? And if that's typical of our culture, is it acceptable to let that into Christian community? James says no. This is a very particular issue, but it sets up a much larger conversation. At what point is it okay for the values and practices of the culture to be embraced by Christian community? And at what point do we need to identify that and allow that? Should there be any interaction at all between social practices in the culture around us and what happens in our faith community? That's been an ongoing conversation among Christians really since the very beginning. There are different Christian traditions that approach that in pretty unique ways, like the Amish community, of course, who have created significant separation between themselves and the world around them. But there are lots of gradations of that. I've spoken on the issue before, but to the point, James is clearly saying that we do need to draw some lines. Jesus wanted us to live into a different way of interacting with each other and living together. And that means we have to discern what fits into that vision and what doesn't. In James' eyes, some of his fellow Christians have been missing the mark on this. He says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you?" And it's all good to know the right things and be able to say the right things and believe the right things, but what about your follow-through? Has it actually changed the way you live? You believe in loving your neighbor as yourself, but are you actually doing that? Is it impacting your decisions? That's what James wants to know. And of course, this is the kind of comment that bothered Martin Luther, who I referenced last week. Can faith save you? James asked. Well, of course, Luther wanted to say yes, contrary to what James was implying. Luther was tormented by all the ways he fell short and didn't follow through, all the ways he failed to do what he wanted to do and all the things he didn't do. And he took comfort in knowing that it's by grace through faith that we are saved and not by our works, by what we do or fail to do. So that was what Luther heard in Paul's writings in the words of Jesus, and he found comfort in that. But there is truth to be found between Luther's core insight that, at least for some of us, has been drilled into us, and what James is saying here. We have to hear the challenge to step up more. We should see the ways we can do better. It's not the spirit of our faith to just live comfortable and undisturbed lives when there are real things in the world that are disturbing. Sometimes wealth and financial means can insulate us from those uncomfortable realities. Everything may seem good to us. We wonder what the problem is because we don't have to face the struggles that some do, like the realities of inequality that James is referencing. And this is what James finds so irritating. James is saying, wake up, church. If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, eat your fill, and yet you don't supply their bodily needs, what good is that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. And it's that final sentence that makes James kind of famous. That's the one that everyone remembers about James' letter. And it's sometimes translated, faith without works is dead. Faith is our foundation, but even Luther said that out of gratitude for the ways we've been blessed and received grace, true faith ultimately will move us out to action, to do something, to share with others, and we will be moved by that grace. A famous pastor once said, "We must remember that it's possible to affirm the existence of God with your lips and deny his existence with your life. The most dangerous type of atheism is not theoretical atheism, but practical atheism. That's the most dangerous type. And the world, even the church, is filled up with people who pay lip service to God and not life service. And there is always a danger that we will make it appear externally that we believe in God, when internally we don't. We say with our mouths that we believe in him, but we live with our lives like he never existed." Those are the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so, what are you called to do? I think of the pandemic we're in, and in many ways it has further exposed inequalities. Those with financial reserves have weathered these months reasonably well. All Americans have access to vaccines, whether they choose to get one or not, but the vast majority of people around the world can't even get a shot if they want it. The United States is in the process of releasing some of our excess doses to other countries, but it's really just a very, very small amount. It seems strange because not only should wealthy nations be helping global neighbors as an act of compassion, but it seems to be in our self-interest as well to get the pandemic under control from all of the variants. Locally, All Saints has responded to the added stress on families in our area with increased contributions to partners like ICA Food Shelf and Urban Ventures. But James' challenge is never resolved through a single action or commitment. This is an ongoing one for us throughout our lives. It's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves through our personal decisions and actions. And the reality is that as we approach all of those moments of truth throughout our lives that we're called to act upon our faith, we will come up short sometimes. Even despite our best intentions, we will fail to follow through. We'll miss the mark. The good news is that God's love is still real for you. God's grace never fails. But as we hear that message of love and grace again, it's a moment to be all the more thankful and grateful, and to be ready the next time, to practice our swing, to take some instruction, and let God's light shine out into the world. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.